Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sue Thomas, president of City Club, and I welcome you all. Those of you here at the Governor Hotel and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club today, April 30th, for our Democratic gubernatorial primary debate. As we begin, we would like to offer our appreciation to our Friday Forum corporate sponsors, whose generous financial support make these time-honored City Club luncheons possible. I'd like to begin today by making a special welcome to our sponsor, Northwest Natural. And I believe we have several folks from Northwest Natural in the audience: Vaughn Summers, Manager of Community Affairs, and Gary Bauer, Director of Governmental Affairs. And anyone else who's from Northwest Natural, can you please stand up and be recognized? And please also join me in thanking all of this quarter's sponsors: Key Private Bank, Northwest Natural, and Schwabe Williamson Wyman. We appreciate your support. And now to introduce our debate moderator. Ted Kay has been a City Club member since 1990 and the club's treasurer since 2007. He has twice won the City Club's President Award. Ted?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's my privilege to moderate this forum between Democratic gubernatorial primary contenders Bill Bradbury and John Kitzhaber. This debate will have several sections. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement in an order previously determined by a coin toss. Second, following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions prepared by City Club's Friday Forum Committee and City Club staff. These are the only questions that will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. We will rely on the judgment of our distinguished panel of City Club members seated at the table in front of me to decide whether or not the City Club questions have indeed been answered by the candidates. If 2 or more of these members raise their cards, indicating that they feel a question has not been answered, I will restate the question and ask the candidate to reply again in 45 seconds. On our panel, we have Elizabeth Friedenwald, Jean Hart, and Jennifer Rollins. Keeping time today at our debate is Elaine McCall. Third, following the City Club's questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask questions of the other candidate. Depending on how much time we have, the candidates will ask 2 or 3 questions. And last, after this rotation of questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. Please be respectful of the candidates and please hold all applause during the debate. And now, the candidates. Bill Bradbury began his political career as an Oregon State representative from Curry County and southern Coos County in 1980. He served in the Oregon Legislature for 14 years. He was elected a state senator in 1984, Senate Majority Leader in 1986, and Senate President in 1993. Following his time in the Senate, he spent 4 years as executive director of a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding common ground on salmon restoration between business owners and environmental groups. Bill Bradbury was appointed Oregon's Secretary of State in November 1999, a position he held for 9 years. He serves on Oregon's Global Warming Advisory Commission and was recently appointed to chair the Oregon Sustainability Board. John Kitzhaber practiced as an emergency room doctor in Roseburg from 1974 to 1988. During that time, he started in politics. He was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives from Douglas County in 1978 and elected to the Oregon Senate for 3 terms beginning in 1980. There, he served as Senate President for a number of sessions and is best known for his role in creating the Oregon Health Plan. John Kitzhaber was elected governor of the state of Oregon in 1994 and re-elected in 1998. Since leaving office in 2002, he has continued to work on healthcare reform and is founder of the Archimedes Movement, a nonprofit organization dedicated to civic involvement in improving healthcare policy. And as I step down to the moderator's table, let's welcome our candidates with a round of applause. Mr. Bradbury, please begin with your opening statement.
So I just want to say thank you so much to the City Club for inviting me here to this debate today. I have had an experience where I always love the opportunity to speak to the City Club of Portland. I think all of us know the challenges that Oregon faces. We need to create jobs, fund education, and protect our natural resources. But while the challenges we face are daunting, I'm excited by Oregon's opportunities for a brighter future. I believe that we can rise once again to meet the challenges that we face today. But we can't do so by pushing off our troubles today to the next generation. Now is the moment we must step forward to write the next great Oregon story. Oregon has chapters in its history where leaders and citizens have stepped forward at crucial junctures to take bold action, and whose actions have made Oregon such an amazing place for all of us to live. Like the early Oregonians who forged our state and the leaders who put Oregon at the forefront of the nation with the Beach Bill, the Bottle Bill, and statewide land use planning. We now stand at the next crucial juncture. We must make a decision. Are we ready to write the next great Oregon chapter in this Oregon story, or are we going to continue to make incremental changes and just muddle through it? I believe we must confront those challenges with the same spirit of bold innovation that previous generations have given us. And in this campaign, I'm proposing some innovative solutions I believe these times require. Number one, we have to put Oregonians back to work. Our economy will be the issue my first term as governor. That's what led me to propose the Bank of Oregon to keep Oregon money in Oregon, creating jobs for Oregonians. We have to start funding our schools. We're simply blowing it as a state when it comes to funding public schools. And I have an innovative plan to fund public education. We must protect our natural resources, and in doing so, make Oregon the sustainability capital of the world. That's my vision for Oregon. An Oregon with family wage jobs, great schools, and an environment that is protected for our children's children. I really thank you for inviting me to this debate today, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please hold your applause until the end of the debate. Mr. Kitzhaber, your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you very much to the City Club for sponsoring this debate today. And I want to start in true policy fashion by comparing for you the challenges facing the state of Oregon and the challenges facing a successful business. Now, most successful businesses start with investment in an environment that allows growth. And as the circumstances in which the business operates begins to change, if the business doesn't change its business plan to reflect the new environment, growth begins to taper off and then gradually decline. General Motors is an example of a company that didn't learn that, continuing to build big gas-guzzling cars in the face of high gasoline prices and concerns over global climate change, and paying its employees in part by large pension promises that they failed to fund. Successful organizations, when they see the world changing, begin to redo their business model to create a new growth curve based on current circumstances, not old circumstances. And the problem is that for a while, the old business model and the new one coexist. And the area in between that has been called the area of paradox. It's an area of a lot of uncertainty, a lot of churning, a lot of insecurity. People know the world's changing. They're afraid of the future because they can't see it, and the tendency is to hold on to the old model even though it's not sustainable. That's exactly the place Oregon and our nation find itself in today in terms of public finance, public education, energy, transportation, and healthcare. And the challenge, as well as the opportunity, is to develop that new growth curve, that new business model for Oregon that'll carry us forward proudly throughout this next decade. Now, during good times, when the economy is good, like in the 90s, and money's coming in, it's very difficult to get people to see, let alone act on, the need to change the way we do business. But the picture's very, very different today. Our fiscal crisis is too big to tax our way out of, it's too big to cut our way out of, and there are only two options for us. One, make the pie bigger by putting Oregonians back to work, and second, innovating in the way we organize and provide public services. We have very real opportunities for immediate job creation by filling high-demand jobs through large-scale energy efficiency projects, starting with our public schools, and leveraging public dollars to unlock frozen credit markets to give small businesses the capital it needs to grow. We also need to recognize that education is the cornerstone of our long-term economic prosperity and health. We need to reduce the huge cost of energy and health care, and we need to create incentives to keep Oregon dollars circulating right here in Oregon. These steps, as well as others that I've outlined in detail on my website, combined with creativity and innovation in how public services are organized and delivered, offers us a pathway through our current fiscal crisis and the promise of a more prosperous, united, and sustainable Oregon. I look forward to working with you over the next few months and over the next 4 years to make sure this becomes our future and our reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please hold your applause. I know you're enthusiastic. We will now move to the portion of the program where I will ask the questions prepared by the Friday Forum Committee and City Club staff. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. I'm going to open with questions directed solely to one candidate who will have 60 seconds to answer. There will be no rebuttals. John Kitzhaber will offer our first response. Mr. Kitzhaber, it's been widely reported that you once said, "Oregon is ungovernable." You now say that this statement was prompted by frustration with partisan political maneuvering and that Oregonians are ready to move to post-partisan politics. What specific policies or constitutional changes would you recommend in order to encourage post-partisanship?
Well, let me say first of all that I did express a concern that Oregon was becoming ungovernable, and I'm more concerned about that today than I was 8 years ago. You only have to look south to California to see a state in utter fiscal and political disarray, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy without the ability to act in the public interest. I think the way we manage our way through the next 2.5 years, and particularly through the next $2.5 billion of revenue shortfall, is going to determine whether we go the California way or create a more united way to address Oregon's problems. I do not believe that you can solve the kinds of problems we have today from the left or from the right. We have to create a new political majority in Oregon that's focused on a set of problems that we have to solve for Oregonians, not for Democrats or for Republicans. I don't think there's a constitutional change we need or a statutory change. I think it's an attitude and a leadership style that recognizes that at the end, all of the great things we've ever accomplished in Oregon have not been done on a bipartisan basis. They've been done by Oregonians who care about themselves, each other, and our children's future. Whoa. I'm just looking for more time, that's all.
Let me be clear. What specific policies or constitutional changes would you recommend in order to encourage post-partisanship?
I do not believe we need a specific policy or constitutional change. We need a change in attitude among Oregonians to recognize that at the end of the day, we need to be Oregonians first and partisans second.
Thank you. Mr. Bradbury, you propose a Bank of Oregon that would keep taxpayer money in Oregon rather than putting it into larger national or multinational banks. This money would then be used to invest in Oregon-based businesses and economic development projects. What are your reasons for creating this state bank when local community banks and credit unions serve the same function?
I think it's very important to be clear that the State Bank of Oregon works with the community banks, state chartered banks, and credit unions. Basically, the funding for the State Bank of Oregon comes from the large multinational banks, there are about 5 or 6 of them in Oregon, that are not making loans to small businesses right now. They've gotten billions of dollars in federal TARP relief, but they are not freeing up money, crucial money for small businesses. So basically, the Bank of Oregon works with the local community, state chartered banks and credit unions to provide loans to small businesses to help our economy do well. And that's really a partnership effort that I think can serve our state and our small business community very well.
Thank you. I'm now going to direct a question to one candidate who will have 60 seconds to respond. Then the opposing candidate will have the option of a 45-second rebuttal. Question to Mr. Kitzhaber. In 2007, Oregon passed a renewable portfolio standard requiring the state's largest energy utilities to provide 25% of their electricity from renewable resources by 2025. How do we meet this goal of 25% renewable energy in 15 years? And what role might coal and nuclear power play in the remaining 75%?
Well, I think that the first thing we need is a 10-year energy and climate change strategy that lays out the incremental steps as well as the choices we're going to have to make to achieve that RPS. If we're in fact going to be phasing out the coal-fired plant at Boardman, we have to have renewable replacement energy for that, or lower carbon energy for that. And I think that this is going to involve a series of trade-offs between figuring out how to site transmission lines. If we want wind power in eastern Oregon, we're going to have to put the transmission lines to bring the fuel to where the load is, the power to where the load is. It's going to require choices about what the backup fuel is, natural gas. So I think the RPS is fine, but we have to have a very explicit pathway to get from here to there, which currently we don't have. I would hope that coal plays an ever-diminishing role in our energy future and would certainly work towards not only in ensuring that we shut down the Boardman plant, but helping other public and private utilities that buy coal-fired power to replace that with renewables as well.
Mr. Bradbury, you have the option of a 45-second rebuttal.
I think there is an incredible opportunity we have, and we should add to the renewable portfolio standard a new standard called the Energy Efficiency Standard. And the Northwest Power Planning Council recently announced that we have an opportunity to meet our future load growth in this region through the use of conservation and energy efficiency. So 85% of it from that source. So it seems to me that's a great place to go to both lower the costs of people operating their buildings and lowering our energy demand, and conservation added to the renewable energy that we know we can provide can really be a solution.
Question to Mr. Bradbury, and in fact, this probably is a follow-on question. You stated that you support the closing of the coal-fired Boardman power plant when Portland General Electric's permit to operate the facility expires in 2014. How will the state help keep energy costs down while removing from the market low-cost energy options such as coal?
Well, I think that it's real clear to me that we need to have a policy that says dirty plants like the Boardman coal plant, which coal, after all, is really one of the dirtiest greenhouse gases we can produce. Coal plants like Boardman need to become history in our energy picture in this state. So basically, you need to replace the power that's produced by Boardman, both from renewable sources, and we now see some renewable sources that are very cost competitive with coal, particularly wind. And the other thing we really need to do is make sure that we focus on energy efficiency that can in fact lower the cost. I mean, it can in fact reduce the demand and meet that the demand that Boardman is currently filling.
Mr. Kitzhaber, you have the option of a 45-second rebuttal.
I think we need to recognize that there will be ratepayer and taxpayer dollars involved with closing down that plant and replacing it with other sources of energy. And the two most vulnerable potential victims there are low-income homeowners who I think need to be protected from rate hikes, and those industries depend on a lot of energy. So in making that transition, we have to be mindful of the impacts of increased taxpayer and ratepayer dollars along the way. I do think that in making that transition, we might want to consider a new policy which begins to view a kilowatt saved or conserved in the same way as a kilowatt generated to create additional incentives for conservation as a larger part of our energy future and of making that transition off coal to lower carbon sources.
I will now ask questions directed to both candidates. Each will have 60 seconds to respond, and panel, you're looking at both questions. We encourage candidate rebuttals of each other's remarks, as well as responses to the question. Our first response will come from Mr. Kitzhaber, then we will alternate. Congress recently passed legislation designed to expand access to health care and keep costs down, but the federal legislation also places new obligations on the states. What specific policies would you propose to maximize the benefits and reduce the liabilities of the new federal legislation in Oregon?
We need to recognize that what Congress passed was health insurance reform, not health care reform. And by 2014, most Oregonians will have a way to pay for health care. The problem is we have a delivery system that's designed to deal with acute complications of chronic illness rather than prevent illness in the first place and manage chronic disease in the home and in the community. And our delivery system will collapse if we don't change it. So the opportunity for Oregon is to redesign our delivery system with some very large state or regional pilot programs in terms of delivery system reform that focuses on keeping people in their homes and out of the hospital in the first place, that keeps people from getting diabetes and congestive heart failure in the first place, and then asks for sweeping federal waivers to give us the flexibility to do it. So the specific answer is I would ask for wide open waivers to design this the right way and fix the delivery system rather than just the financing system. And I believe we have a huge opportunity to do that. Don Berwick, who was recently appointed head of CMS, who grants waivers, is a longtime personal friend and is very interested in helping Oregon become a national leader in this area.
The real beauty of having the federal government finally adopt at least health insurance reform, the real beauty of that is that Senator Wyden got a provision inserted in that bill that allows states to develop a public option. So we can pursue a public option to make sure that health care is, in fact, available to all of our citizens at an affordable rate. That will be a great step, and I think that it's real clear to me that one of the goals of having health insurance is to basically start providing coverage for prevention instead of just emergency rooms that people can go to now and get sort of care but not great care. But the reality is the beauty of having health insurance is that you can start to move in the direction of prevention and really lower health care costs.
Thank you. To Mr. Bradbury next. Oregon's kicker law refunds money to taxpayers when state revenue exceeds projections by 2% or more. Most Democrats, including both of you, are in favor of kicker reform, so the real debate among Democrats is not if, but when it should be reformed. Would you push to put kicker reform on the ballot in 2012 or 2014, or would you follow the lead of legislators who want to wait until pollsters tell them it's okay to do so?
It's very clear that this state needs to amend the kicker law to basically allow the kicker to primarily be used to create a state rainy day fund that helps us levelize or stabilize funding to education and state services. I would be supportive of doing that as soon as it makes sense to do it, which I think would be probably fall of 2011. In other words, the legislature's in from January to, say, June or July, and then I think it would be good to have it on the ballot that year.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your response.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need it to do it the sooner the better. I would think November of 2011 would be my preference. I think a precursor to that, though, is we're going to have to recreate the political center I discussed earlier. You know, the people who are on opposite sides of the recent tax measures, 66 and 67, have to work together or we can't pass this. This is a constitutional change, And we're going to have to recognize that this is good for Oregon, it's good for our business community, it's good for stability of our school system, and it's good for our future. So we have to refocus the conversation in Oregon. We have a lot of work to do. And I think that work has to be done during this campaign to create that coalition and that sense of urgency that will be necessary to not just to refer this to the ballot, but actually to get it passed.
Thank you. You have both addressed the need to transition our state to renewable energy. Renewable hydroelectric power is great for reducing emissions, but has a devastating effect on native salmon populations. As governor, would you use your office to make significant improvements to salmon runs and discuss the potential for major dam removal, or do concerns about climate change and the need for renewable energy trump concerns for fish and wildlife? Mr. Kitzhaber, your response.
Well, I think it's a false choice, but I do think there are going to be choices involved. Clearly, hydro is a very, very low carbon source of energy, and this just, I think, emphasizes the need to create a 10-year strategy that lays out all of our options from getting to from here to a lower carbon future. I have been a strong advocate, as Bill Bradbury has, of salmon restoration. I've been involved in lawsuits over the Columbia River biop. I made an infamous speech that legitimized at least a discussion of reaching the lower Snake River dams, and I don't intend to back away from that. But I think we need to recognize that there are going to be trade-offs in getting from here to there. And we're going to have to figure out how to do that in a way that is the most efficient and effective, but also minimizes the environmental impacts. There are impacts of running transmission lines across Cascades. So we need a clear, explicit framework, which I intend to put together over the next 6 months, that allows us to make those decisions in a thoughtful way and be accountable for the consequences.
Mr. Bradbury, your response.
If there is one issue that John and I share absolutely completely, it is that both of us want to see strong, healthy, native salmon runs in Oregon in all of our rivers. And it's very clear that there are ways to manage the Columbia River that help salmon, and there are ways to manage the Columbia River that don't help salmon. And I will certainly be a very strong advocate for the Bonneville Power Administration in their biological opinion to manage salmon, to manage the river such that it benefits salmon. I think that we can consider taking out dams, but I think we also need to weigh the other issues, which is, as John said, it's a very clear low carbon source that we need to make use of as well. So it's a balancing act.
Thank you. Oregon's recent application for federal Race to the Top education funding was rated 7th worst out of the 40 states that applied. In fact, its extremely weak plans to improve teacher and principal effectiveness based on performance received a failing grade. Still, the Portland Association of Teachers took pains to oppose the application and publicly expressed irritation at the idea of performance-related reform. At the risk of upsetting teachers' unions, do you think Oregon should reapply for Race to the Top funds? And if so, would you support a bolder teacher for performance program as part of the application? Mr. Bradbury, your response.
I think that the reason the Race to the Top applications were not very high ranked and were in fact very controversial among teachers unions was because you've got to start at the bottom. You've got to start in the classroom. You've got to work with the people that are working with the students every day. And that was really missing in large part in the Race to the Top applications, and that's what the discomfort really related to. I think that clearly, if you have a proposal that involves the teachers, involves the students, involves the parents, and involves the administrators, you're going to do very well. But if you come up with something that's really a half-baked proposal that sort of involves them, I don't think you're going to do very well at all.
I see the question marks raised. Let me repeat the question. At the risk of upsetting teachers' unions, do you think Oregon should reapply for Race to the Top funds? And if so, would you support a bolder teacher pay-for-performance program as part of the application?
I think it would make sense for Oregon to reapply, and I think they should learn from their first experience, and what they should learn in reapplying is that they need to more effectively involve all the players who are going to be part of this race to the top. And that means more effectively involving the classroom teachers, more effectively involving the principals and the students and parents in putting forward an application that I think would really make some good sense.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your response.
Well, I think we should reapply if we agree with the strings that come along with the money. I don't think we should apply just to get the money. I think we need to ask ourselves whether the federal agenda is consistent with the Oregon agenda. Now, regardless of whether we apply or not, I do believe that we need a well-crafted and with the involvement of teachers, student and teacher performance assessment tool based on a formative or growth model. I do not support tying teacher pay or performance to a result on a standardized test. There are so many factors that teachers cannot control. But we're talking about identifying where the student is on day one and where they're moving to. That gives you the ability to bring additional resources to students who need it and additional professional development opportunities for teachers who can benefit from it. It seems to me this is a very pro-education, pro-teacher, pro-student approach. It gives us the ability to identify where problems are in a positive, not punitive way, and try to make progress to bring students and teachers up.
Thank you. According to the Oregonian, the Oregon University System Chancellor believes that next year's projected budget gap, or next biennium's budget gap of $2.5 billion is likely to land hard on higher education. But higher education drives a competitive workforce, innovative entrepreneurship, and economic growth. What specific laws, policies, or funding mechanisms would you change to provide better support for higher education?
I've proposed a unified, transparent education budget that allows us to look across the continuum of education and make investments where it will give us the best return in terms of student results and state objectives. In other words, getting out of the siloed approach of viewing K through 12 and higher ed and community colleges as separate entities. Second of all, we have a state governance model for higher ed that is a throwback from the days when we paid 70% of the cost and we really had universities that were state agencies. That's just flipped now, and I think what we need to do is give the universities additional operational flexibility to raise other resources to supplement state resources within the context of still maintaining a system of public education. I would eliminate the Board of Higher Education and create a post-secondary coordinating board that would include not only higher ed but community colleges as well, recognizing that they are part of a common post-secondary capacity that allows kids a 2, 4, or 6+ year pathway into the new economy. And those institutions would still have to operate within state performance standards.
Mr. Bradbury,
So
your response?
I really think we are at an interesting point of challenge. And that challenge is, are we going to have a public higher education system or not? I fully understand why the presidents are now talking about privatizing and corporatizing higher education, because they're not getting the support they need that they used to get from the state general fund. That's what leads me to say we need to really fund adequate education. We do need to do it at K through 12. We also need to be raising revenue to reduce tuition in community colleges and increase the state general fund share to make them truly public universities that provide real access for lots of different students. And I'm very committed to our higher ed system being a public education system.
Question to both of you. Now, thank you. The recent economic recession has hit Oregon's Public Employees Retirement System, PERS, particularly hard. It dropped $17 billion in 2008 alone, more than 1/4 of its value. And while it has rebounded partially, the state's actuary projects that employer contributions will need to rise significantly to keep the system adequately funded. There is little doubt that this would place an enormous burden on public employers over the next decade, potentially requiring them to prioritize pension obligations over public services. What changes, if any, would you make to the Oregon Public Employees Retirement System in order to make it more sustainable? Mr. Bradbury, your response.
I think we need to be very clear about the public employee retirement system. And the situation we're in right now was major changes were made by the legislature in 2003. Those changes were implemented and the court threw some of them out and said, no, you can't do that to what are called Tier 1 employees. You can only do some of that. So I've met with Paul Cleary, the director of the PERS system, and he has basically shown me the obligation we have. And it's really very directly related to what are called the Tier 1 employees, and it's a huge cost that diminishes over time. So I really believe that what's required is patience, because huge changes were made in 2003. It requires patience to move forward, because clearly the courts have protected the benefits of Tier 1 employees, and we need to have patience to see that move forward.
I see the question marks raised. Let me repeat the question. What changes, if any, would you make to PERS in order to make it more sustainable?
Well, I think that the changes that are probably most important to make relate to things that the courts have said we can't change. So we're in a bit of a conundrum, and that's why I really feel it's an honest word to say patience, because the courts have clearly said specific promised benefits can't be taken away, and if you meet with Paul Cleary, he will tell you that's the biggest driver of the PERS system. So as long as we continue to run a constitutional government, that's what we're going to have to live with.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your response.
I think there are two separate important issues here. One is the actuarial soundness of the PERS system over time, and second is the increased employer contribution in the upcoming biennium. The PERS system has 20 years to amortize losses, which is very conservative. Most states have 30. So I think the changes that were made in 2003, I agree with Bill, we need to wait and see how they play out. And we need to keep an eye on the structure of the PERS system, but we do have a window of time that's allowed by law to amortize those losses. We need to keep an eye on it, but I don't think we need to do anything about that right now. $422 million, or the $2.5 billion hole, however, is the increased employer contribution. It seems to me that has to be dealt with in the context of the efforts to rebalance the 2011-2013 budget. We're going to be in a position of looking at laying people off, reducing important state services, or looking at that $422 million. And I've told the unions that I won't make any agreements without talking with them and won't do any negotiations without them at the table, but I don't think we can duck coming to terms with that short-term cash flow issue.
Thank you. We have heard politicians promising job creation for a long time, but Oregon's unemployment remains one of the highest in the nation. What are we doing wrong, and what specifically would you do to put Oregonians back to work? Mr. Kitzhaber, your response.
Well, I think we need to broaden our strategy for economic development beyond just supporting traded sector industries, which are very important, and bring new capital into the state, and take more pains to make sure that capital stays in Oregon and is reinvested in Oregon through developing local sourcing, local procurement, local supply chain opportunities to help create that more resilient fabric inside the state of Oregon. We also have an opportunity to develop a whole new export cluster of knowledge-based exports based on our skill in sustainability, green building, green chemistry, and environmental services. I think the low-hanging fruit is large-scale weatherization projects, starting with our public school buildings. We have 94 million square feet of public schools paying between 21 cents and 2.10 a square foot for energy. And we could put people back to work next summer in every rural and urban community in Oregon that has a public school, good trades jobs that will lower the cost of education, increase our energy dependence, and stimulate the economy.
Mr. Bradbury, your response.
I think our real focus in terms of state policy needs to be on small business. 70% of the people in this state work in small businesses, and that's an incredible growth opportunity. I think we all know right now that small businesses need more money. That's what led me to propose the creation of the Bank of Oregon. But my record goes back a long way. One of the first things I did in the legislature was create small business development centers to help small businesses really weed through all the challenges of being a small business. When I was Secretary of State, we dramatically reduced the fees for small businesses and have now created a one-stop shop for small businesses to come to get registered, both with the Department of Revenue and the Secretary of State and some other agencies. So I think your focus needs to clearly be on assisting the small business sector to really provide jobs.
Thank you. Now, during this portion of the program, each candidate will ask questions of the other. We have time for 3 questions from each candidate. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The opposing candidate will have 60 seconds to respond, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. We will alternate between the candidates and begin with Mr. Bradbury. Mr. Bradbury, your first question of Mr. Kitzhaber.
Okay, John, you have promised to provide free community college education for every Oregon student who wants one. I provided a specific funding mechanism for increased support for K-12 education. Specifically, how much does that proposal you've made cost, and how do you plan on paying for this free college education for everybody?
Good question, and I haven't promised a free college education. The commitment is to provide financial access to at least 2 years of post-secondary education to every qualified Oregon high school graduate. And I would do that by pooling the financial aid resources we have right now, focusing them on the first 2 years, and overlay a means testing or needs test. That is, how much can the student pay, how much can their family pay, and what does the state have to make up to ensure that financial access for at least 2 years of post-secondary education. So the attempt is to see how far we can get with the resources we currently have, with the long-term commitment of increasing financial aid and access to post-secondary schools. You know, my dad was a member of the greatest generation, and when he came home from World War II, a grateful nation gave him and his generation a college education through the GI Bill, which I think was the most amazing social program of the last century. And today, when we know post-secondary education is important, we've raised huge financial barriers to access for our students, and we simply have to address that.
Mr. Bradbury, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
Fine.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your first question of Mr. Bradbury.
Well, Bill, when we were on the river once, you told me a story of this restaurant you used to own that cooked deep-fried fish, deep-fried chicken, and I think deep-fried potatoes. And as I recall the story, you came down one morning and the vat with all that fat in it had kind of congealed, and there was a little layer, and you saw little footprints and a little tail mark going out across this vast surface, and then a little broken place. And I can't remember, did you just turn that sucker on and cook some more chicken, or did you get the mouse out?
Well, John, I'm happy to report that you forgot one other critical menu item, which was the deep-fried turnovers that we had for dessert. They were really great. So the situation was the little foot tracks out and then a hole in the middle of the frozen or cold fat. And so we had to turn, it had all congealed, so we had to turn the cooker on to get the mouse out. So that's what we had to do.
Mr. Kitzhaber, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
Pass on that.
Mr. Bradbury, your next question of Mr. Kitzhaber.
This is a question relating to voting. Throughout this debate, you've spoken at length about your plans for health care and the environment, and you've got to be commended for your leadership in both those areas when you and I served together in the 1990s. My question to you is, in 2007, we had a ballot measure that would have provided health care for every child in Oregon, and it was fought against very strongly by big tobacco. So can you explain to me why you failed to even bother to mail in your ballot on this critical measure?
Yeah, and I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. Actually, I did bring in my ballot, and you can check this. I forgot to sign the little envelope on the outside, so that's an explanation but not an excuse. I have been in public office for 22 years, and I'm looking to do another 4, and I have failed to vote on several occasions during that period of time. I offer no excuses. Voting is important. It needs to be taken seriously by everyone, including myself.
Mr. Bradbury, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
Just I would say that I'm very proud of the record I have voting in every election back as far as we've kept records. And I think it's an important part of being both a citizen here and also someone seeking support from citizens to vote in elections.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your next question of Mr. Bradbury.
My question is, what was the moment at which you decided you wanted to commit your adult life to public service in Oregon, and who was the individual who had the most significant impact on your political philosophy and your political career?
The moment would be probably 1979. I was working at KGW-TV here in Portland, and I was interested in getting back home to the South Coast. And essentially, I recognized that one opportunity would be to serve as a state representative and make some money, not much, but some money, and be closer to my home and my family. I also enjoyed very much coming over to meet with you. You had just been elected to the legislature, I think in 1979, and I came over to talk with you about running for the legislature, and I was very encouraged with that possibility after you and I had met. So here we are today. Wow!
Mr. Kitzhaber, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, I'll just say that it's been an amazing experience serving with Bill throughout the legislature. He was the majority leader when I was Senate President. Actually got to appoint him Secretary of State, which was one of my greatest and best appointments. And so here we are, as he says.
Mr. Bradbury, your next question of Mr. Kitzhaber.
So my question relates to a phrase that you've been asked about a lot. And in your final 2 years, you called the state ungovernable. And then this past Wednesday, during the KGW debate, you said that Oregon is even more ungovernable today. So given the fact that you walked away from governing the state when it was ungovernable, why should voters give you a third chance when it's even more ungovernable today?
Well, actually, I didn't walk away. I was term limited, so I was sort of required to walk away. The correct quote here is, I'm more concerned about Oregon becoming ungovernable now than I was 8 years ago. I think we're more divided than we are today. I think we see utter political paralysis and chaos in the United States Congress, particularly the U.S. Senate. We see a state south of us that's on the verge of bankruptcy. And one of the reasons I'm running is I think we're better than that. I don't think we have to go the way of California. We're not California, but we have to establish a different kind of way to relate with each other, a different way to have a conversation about our differences that doesn't involve bitter partisanship and one-upsmanship and a scorched earth campaign policy that leaves nobody left standing to govern. And I believe that I have some experiences and some perspectives and Lord knows some hard lessons learned that I think can be useful to help steer Oregon at least through this next budget crisis, which I think is essential if we're to take the high road rather than the south road.
Mr. Bradbury, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
I think it's critical to be able to work together with people who you may not agree with. And one of the focuses I've had in my life is to really honor and collaborate. Honor various participants that all come together to try to solve a problem with salmon, or try to solve a problem of water quality, or try to solve some other problem. Honor people and collaborate together is what it takes to get it done.
Mr. Kitzhaber, your last question of Mr. Bradbury.
You're in trouble now, my friend. So, what would you say your greatest contributions to the people of Oregon have been during your long and illustrious career as a public servant?
I would say my greatest contributions would be first thing I did when I got to the legislature was the Salmon and Trout Enhancement Program. I would say that small business development centers in my second term. And then I would say I'm very proud serving as Secretary of State and implementing vote by mail. Phil Kiesling was the father of vote by mail. I was the midwife of vote by mail. And I'm real proud of how that's gone. And I'm also real proud of some of the audits we did, and I'm also real proud of setting up this one-stop business registry center, which I think really puts us in a good position moving forward.
Mr. Kitzhaber, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, if Phil was the father of vote by mail and you were the midwife, I guess I was the anesthesiologist, because I vetoed it the first time it came to my desk. But we had a normal non-breach delivery there at the end, and so it worked out all right.
Thank you to the midwife and anesthesiologist. We will now move to the final portion of the program, 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. We will begin with Mr. Bradbury.
Thank you so much. I'm surprised you didn't raise your question mark. But no. Throughout, Oregon's history, we've been confronted with some really great challenges. And Oregonians have embraced bold and unconventional solutions to those challenges. Solutions that really have made Oregon a model for the nation. Comprehensive land use planning, the bottle bill, the beach bill, and vote by mail, to name just a few. But these iconic measures started out as just an idea. They were ideas that required a leader who could look beyond the immediate crisis to what Oregon could be. And right now, Oregon obviously faces some really great challenges. And we can't confront these challenges with an incremental, centrist, corporatist 1990s mentality and approach. We need to look to the future, to the possibility of what we can be. That's why I've proposed the Bank of Oregon to keep Oregon money in Oregon, to put Oregonians back to work, and declare economic sovereignty from the very banks that are responsible for this economic crisis. That's why I'm proposing finally funding public education in Oregon, and doing so by deciding that our children's future is way more important than special tax breaks. And that's why I'm proposing making Oregon the sustainability capital of the world, with a plan to protect our environment and put Oregonians back to work. Now, make no mistake, these are bold, unconventional ideas, but they are rooted in Oregon's tradition of confronting great challenges with even greater solutions. That's why I want to be your next governor of Oregon, and that's why today I am asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Now for Mr. Kitzhaber.
Well, let me too thank the City Club for sponsoring this debate, and I want to thank my friend Bill for the good exchanges we've had over the last few months. One of the most frequently asked questions since I put my name in race here is why? Why are you running for governor again? And the answer is very, very simple. My love for Oregon, my concern about its future, but also the huge opportunities that I see embedded in this crisis. We face today an unprecedented set of challenges going into a $2.5 billion revenue shortfall with a high unemployment rate, a very unstable tax system, and a deeply divided state. And as I said, how we manage our way through the next 2 years is going to determine whether we go the way of California or whether we're going to have a more prosperous, more united, more sustainable future for Oregon. The challenges that we face, putting Oregon back to work and stabilizing our state finances, require someone with experience and innovative ideas who can hit the ground running. We're not going to have a lot of time for on-the-job training next year. And I believe that my perspectives and experiences and the lessons that I've learned can help lead Oregon through this difficult period that lies ahead. But it also requires someone who is able to heal the wounds that are pulling this state apart. And that means that if we hope to be successful, if we hope to set a new course for the state of Oregon, we've got to use this political campaign to unite us, not to divide us. And that's exactly the kind of campaign that I intend to run. The young men and women of the Oregon Bus Project here in Portland have proclaimed their intent to set a new political course for Oregon. Not left, not right, but forward. And they're correct. We desperately need to move beyond the partisan drumbeat coming out of Washington, D.C., and 24-hour cable news and radio talk shows. It doesn't have to be that way here. And it can't be that way here if we hope to be successful. 40% of us are Democrats, 32% of us are Republicans, 25% are independents or unaffiliated. The fact is there is not a partisan majority in the state of Oregon. We have to recreate a political center, the kind of political center that has been at the heart of all the great accomplishments this state has made in the past. Not a Democratic majority, not a Republican majority, but an Oregon majority. And the only kind of majority that can move us, not left, not right, but forward. We can't put Oregon back to work. We can't make our schools stronger. We can't reduce the cost of energy and health care unless we do it together. And we can't do that through bitter partisanship or by simply electing a Republican or a Democrat. We have some very serious problems ahead of us and some very difficult decisions we have to make together, and we have to be able to talk about them, not as partisans, but as Oregonians. I'm willing to lose this election, but I'm not willing to win it if that means simply attacking my opponent, ducking the hard questions, and ignoring the truth. I believe Oregonians deserve better. I believe all of us are ready for a serious conversation about what we have to do together to secure our future. If I'm wrong, you're not going to elect me. But you know what? I think that's exactly the kind of conversation you've been waiting for.
Thank you. That wraps up our forum.
As we close, I'd like to thank our Truth Squad members, Elizabeth Friedenwald, Jean Hart, and Jennifer Rollins, our timekeeper, Elaine McCall. A special thank you to our moderator, Ted Kay, and of course, our greatest appreciation to our debaters, Bill Bradbury and John Kitzhaber. Tune in next week for the Democratic State Primary. We're adjourned.
Thank you.